Good evening. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Um, Thank you for introducing me. So, my name's Natasha, as you know. I moved here to Wales from London 12 years ago. I'm the mother of two children, Raya, who is 16, going to be 17 next month, and Ella May, who is 27, almost 28. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences of moving here to Wales. Um, I was single mother when I moved here. I'm not now, but I can go into that a little bit more in the presentation.
Thank you so much for that brief introduction. So what we'll do now is we'll go with your presentation. If you're ready to present, then we'll go into the presentation, Natasha.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to do it this way. Okay, so my journey from London to Wales. Right. Well, as we go on into the presentation, we will speak about the trials that you face when you do God's will. So I wasn't raised a Seventh Day Adventist. I wasn't raised a Christian at all. Okay, I wasn't raised a Christian at all, but I did have a knowledge of who God was because my grandmother used to take me to church as a small child. So I always talked to God as a child and believed in him immediately and always knew who he was and that he was there looking after us. Um, One thing led to another in my life, and I ended up being um, quite quite a rebellious teenager, which resulted in me ending up, living quite a horrible, quite bad, quite sad lifestyle until the age of 33. From the ages of 21 to 33, I got quite involved heavily in Class A drugs and was addicted to. There's no children on here, so I can say I was addicted to strong drugs, cocaine, for many years. And I always used to pray to God and ask him to help me to stop with this addiction, but I never could. Um, I never could. It just had such a hold of me. I was in chains, bondage really, to the enemy. So it's important to kind of say that part of the story. I'm not going to go into it fully because we don't have time, and I know you've all been waiting. But it's important to kind of say where I came from. Um, because it helps you to understand a little bit more of why I moved out of London and things like this. So when I was 33, I met completely by accident a lady called Yulin and her husband Rod. Now they were having trouble with their daughter, and she called my house phone because she found my phone number on a book, her daughter's exercise book. Her daughter was 13 at the time, same age as my eldest daughter at the time. So she had called me to ask if I'd seen her daughter because she'd run away from her. Long story short, we got talking and she just sounded like such a wonderful, she just had this peace about her that I really needed at the time. And her voice was like melodious and she was talking to me. I was thinking, this lady sounds so nice. I want what she has. Anyway, the next day she called, we got talking more, and I said to her, "Are you a Christian?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, Can I come to your church with you?" She was completely shocked by this, but she said yes, and she started rejoicing. And that was a Friday. So from that very evening, I started to go to Friday night Bible study with her family and some of our friends. Well, they're now my friends, and started to go to church with them every Sabbath. But little did they know that I had such a strong addiction to crack cocaine. They had no idea. But I knew at that time I needed God and I was searching. I had been searching actually for about 4 months when she came into my life. I was going to different churches, trying to find God, but wasn't finding him in any of the churches I was going to. Anyway, so started to go to church with them, going to Bible studies. And I remember the very first Bible study that I went to that Friday evening was at Alice and Junior Thomas's house. And I remember going there, we were sat down, they were studying the Bible. And I remember thinking, wow, like these people, they're so different. They were dressed modest, the children were well behaved. And I just sat there and I thought, these people seem like the people that I read about in the Bible. I'd never come across it because the other churches I was visiting every Sunday to try and find God, they seemed very much like me, a lot of them. And I thought I needed strict discipline. And I thought this is the place to be. So I carried on going to church. This was in the March of 2008. I'm now 33 years old. There's a whole testimony and there's a lot of, a lot to tell, but obviously I don't have the time. So maybe another time I can give the whole testimony. Anyway, so that's 2008. I get baptized in the May 2008, and my journey as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian really starts. So I was lucky in the way that I had come into the church through people that were studying present truth. Unfortunately, we didn't really hear much present truth at church, but the group that I was with, my new friendship group, was studying present truth. We were listening to people like Moses Mason, Jeremiah Davis, Dwayne Lemon, and people like this. So I was really blessed to have that friendship group. And obviously, they were talking a lot at the time about country living. So this is now when we started to study country living. Now, as I go into the presentation, the 4 chapters I can read that really come to mind, the 4 chapters in my journey to move into the country are these that you can see. So you've got laying a foundation, finding a suitable home, trials and faith, joy and peace. Those seem to be the four chapters, I could say, of my journey into moving to the country. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll make a start. Okay, so Sister White says, in laying a foundation, she says, let everyone take time to consider carefully and not be like the man in the parable who began to build and was not able to finish. Not a move should be made, but that movement and all that it portends are carefully considered, everything weighed. There may be individuals who will make a rush to do something and enter into some business they know nothing about. This God does not require. That's from Last Day Events 120.2. So for me, it was very, very important, and for our group, to really lay a solid foundation, lest we make hasty decisions and move without God's guidance. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide. So what we started to do was to study the message of country living for ourselves. Okay, and as I said, sadly we didn't hear these messages at church, but we started to study these messages for ourselves by listening to, as I said, Moses Mason, Jeremiah Davis, Doug Batchelor, and many others who were really strongly preaching the message at this time. As I said, the year is now 2008. I'd only been in church literally a few months, but I was on fire for the Lord, and really, really was convicted on this message on leaving the city. So if we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we studied the scriptures along with Spirit of Prophecy. We would do this on a weekly basis. We also met monthly to fast and pray. We were praying and fasting and studying for God's guidance in finding the right home in the right location. We're also praying the family to be of one accord. We were praying to be close to be, where we moved to be close to the church, a church, and also brethren. We were praying about finances, God to help provide the finances for the move. And we're also praying about sustaining a regular income in the countryside, because many of us had jobs that we would be leaving to move to the countryside. And if we go on to the next slide, please. We also started saving money together. So we would put, this was mainly done at Alice and Junior Thomas's house. So we would have most of our studies around there. They were so welcoming to all of us. And we all practically lived around there. When I say all, it was about a good 5-6 families of us that were studying this message at the time. So we started saving money together. We put that in a jar weekly, and we used some of that money to buy barrels. we were just doing a lot of things by faith. So we bought barrels to start storing non-perishable food. So we would buy things like oats, tinned food, flour, tins such as chickpeas and things like this, and start storing. And at the time, we were also considering moving to the Caribbean. We weren't quite sure where God would have us, but we all wanted to go somewhere hot. So we're either going to go to the Caribbean or to Africa. That's where we were going. It's another story how we ended up in Wales, but we'll get to that. So so we started to think, if we've got barrels, then it would be easier for us to ship some of our things abroad if we did end up moving. Okay, so you'll hear me saying we and our a lot in my presentation. It's because I didn't do anything alone. It was collectively, it was a group of us. We were all on one accord. We studied together. We did everything together. We made decisions together. We spoke to God together, and we sought his guidance together. And me being a single mum of 2 children, really felt it necessary to be with a group of people. Okay, so and also, I would like to say, if you are a single parent, I would advise, you to do the same. It would be, it's difficult making these moves alone, finding the right location. And if you don't have a group that you can study with, then when you're thinking about moving, look for locations where there are other Seventh-day Adventists, like-minded Seventh-day Adventists. It's important, for homeschooling, for having company, and to avoid loneliness. So yeah, that would be my advice. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so in finding a suitable home. So we followed Sister White's counsel by looking for homes in an area that wouldn't compromise our morals and religion. If you go on to the next slide, I'll just read the quote from Ellen White. So she says, in choosing a home, God would have us consider, first of all, the moral and religious influences that would surround us and our families. We may be placed in trying positions, for many cannot have their surroundings what they would. And whenever duty calls us, God will enable us to stand uncorrupted. If we watch and pray, trusting in grace, in the grace of Christ, I'll read that bit again. God will enable us to stand uncorrupted if we watch and pray, trusting in the grace of Christ. But we should not needlessly expose ourselves to influences that are unfavorable to the formation of Christian character. When we voluntarily place ourselves in an atmosphere of worldliness and unbelief, we displease God and drive holy angels from our homes. So as I said, we really strongly considered this counsel from Ellen White when we were moving, when we were considering where we would move to. Obviously, we were moving from London, which is a huge city full of noise, crime, and all sorts. So, it was a big move. So we really wanted to make sure that we did things correctly. So if you go on to the next slide. Okay, so this is the house, the one with the silver car parked outside. This is the first home that I found in Wales. It was in a place called Llandybia in Carmarthenshire. Now, Llandybia is a small village with tranquil surroundings, really. It's got a lovely river running through it, beautiful walks. Now, when we first moved to Wales, let me just go back a little of how we ended up in Wales. I forgot to let you know that. So after much fasting and praying, we were going to a family camp meeting in 2008. We were just going to a family camp meeting. We had no idea what would happen, to us in that meeting. So we were going to Jack and Joy's family camp meeting in Wales. And all 5 families of us that were studying together, we all went. Now, lo and behold, when we got there, I never knew there was such beauty in the UK, to be honest, because I'd been abroad many times, but I hadn't really traveled the UK. So when we went there, we noticed that the children absolutely loved it in Wales. We loved it in Wales. the fresh air, the mountains, the rolling hills, and all these type of things. It was just absolutely glorious. When we were on our way back to London after the camp meeting, we were all sad, and the children especially didn't want to go. As we entered back into London, all of them were saying they wanted to go back to Wales. So we were like, okay. And one of our one couple in our friendship group, Sherry and Mike Jonas, they started. We were all praying. One day, Sherry said that the Lord had said to her to move to Wales. So Sherry found a place in Wales. She went to stay with Jack and Joy along with Alice and Junior Thomas, and they both found homes in Wales. I'm kind of cutting the story a bit short. Both found homes in Wales within a couple of months, actually, of family camp. I think family camp was the May 2008, and by June or July, they'd moved to Wales. So the other families went to visit them, and we all started looking for properties as well. As I said, 5 families. We all started looking for properties. We all found properties, and by the September of that same year, all 5 families, that's 24 of us all together, had all relocated in Wales. So as you can imagine, it was like an exodus. It was amazing, and it was just wonderful to have so much support. I mean, imagine moving with your best friends. It was great. The children had each other, we had each other, and it was wonderful. So this is how I ended up in Clandebia. Okay, so moving to a town, first of all, was a good idea for us at the time. We didn't know Wales as much as we would like to. So we thought, okay, let's rent a property for 6 months and let's start getting to know Wales, the different areas, how people live, and just gradually adjust from leaving a big city. And we know that this, a village isn't the countryside, but there was a lot of rural plain around it, lovely walks, as I said, rivers, and it was remarkably different than London, much slower pace and things like this. So that's what we done. And obviously, the children as well, it was good for them to gradually get used to the different pace of life. It was a good thing to do. So if we go on to the next slide, please. Just another picture of Clandebia. This is where I live. This was the road that I lived on. Very pretty place. Okay. So if you go on to the next slide, please. Right, so once I'd found a suitable house, it was time to sit down, going back now to when we were in London. So when we'd found these houses, obviously it was time to let the family know. So it was time to sit down really with my daughter, Rhea. At the time she was 5, and my other daughter at the time, Ella May, was 15, to tell them I'd found a house and let them know what date we'd be moving. Now, my children were both really instrumental in praying with me. I'd kept them informed of the progress every step of the way. So the youngest, Rhea, at the time, she was excited. She was 5 years old. She loved Wales. All her friends were going. For Rhea, she didn't have any inhibitions at all, and was really looking forward to moving to Wales. But my eldest daughter, as I said, she was 15, and being much older, she was concerned about leaving her friends, obviously school, her home that she had known. That's all she had known was her life in London. And raising Ella May, I raised Ella May in the world. She was 13 when I got baptized and came into the church, so she had a very different upbringing. So it was difficult for her. So making the decision to move away was difficult, and I battled night and day with how I was going to tell her. But I knew that God was calling me out of the city, that had caused me much pain, as I mentioned to you earlier on. The life that I did lead, in my, all through my 20s into my early 30s, was horrendous, really. And yeah, I knew God was leading me out of there for a better life. So I felt strongly convicted, through the study, mainly of Adventist home and child guidance, that my daughter Rhea should not be raised in the city, but raised in the countryside, where she would, you know, where she would be able to have a less temptation, then that's it. That's what's, you know, what's in the city. Um, and I also knew that Ella May, although she was raised in the world, would face less temptation in the countryside. I hoped that she would draw nearer to God and have a more wholesome life. Okay. Now, the book Patriarchs and Prophets was the book that most strengthened me um, throughout the whole process of praying about moving to the countryside. The chapter Destruction of Sodom helped me with every single decision, you know, regarding leaving the city. I would revisit this chapter time and time again. And even 12 years on, I revisit the chapter and I look at it and I squint my eye sometimes at the things that I didn't read properly and the mistakes that I've made, and, you know, where I followed guidance and where I didn't follow guidance. That chapter has really, really helped me. But this particular quote told me exactly how I was to go about speaking to my children, especially LMA. So it says, and this is from Patriarchs and Prophets 1:6.1. So, if Lot himself had manifested no hesitancy to obey the angel's warning, but had earnestly fled towards the mountain without one word of pleading or remonstrance, his wife also would have made her escape. The influence of his example would have saved her from the sin that sealed her doom. But his hesitancy and delay caused her to lightly regard the divine warning. While her body was upon the plain, her heart clung to Sodom, and she perished with it. Now, you know, as you can see there, hesitation. So that told me basically how I was to deal with it. I was not to hesitate and allow LMA to plead, not hesitate, allowed LMA to be secure in my conviction. If I hesitated, it would have shown her I was unsure, allowing her to plead the case and probably winning, as my heart ached as she was in such pain about the move. And I probably would have not moved at all, you know. I probably would have listened to her pleas. But this quote here, this paragraph really helped me to be firm in my decision and not hesitate. So I sat them both down and told them, you know, that we were moving. Our first trial came on moving day, which was not long, maybe a month after, you know, I'd spoken to them about the move. So on moving day, my daughter was nowhere to be seen. You know, I went to sleep at night and she wasn't there. She hadn't come home. I didn't sleep a wink. I knew I was moving the next morning. I knew the removal van was coming. Some of the families, some of the 5 families, the Hanson Bartholomew family had already moved to Wales. The Thomas family had already moved to Wales, and the Jonas family, they were already there. It was just 2 families left to move, which was myself and the Barrett family. So they were there, you know, the Thomases, the Hanson Bartholomews, and the Jonases were going to be at my house in Wales waiting for the removal van to get there so they could start unloading. And I didn't sleep. I had no idea what I was going to do. My daughter wasn't home. I didn't know what to do, basically. But what happened, thank God, the next morning, my he's not my brother, but he's like a brother to me. LMA's uncle, her dad's brother, called me and said that LMA was with him. She was feeling quite upset. He said, Tash, he said, you go on and I will bring her to Wales next week. She just needs time to calm down. And I've told her she can stay with me the week and I'll bring her up. So that was what I needed to hear at that time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made the move. I felt comforted to know she was with her uncle, she was safe, and that the move must go on. Okay, so that's what I did. I went on up to Wales. And if we go on to the next slide. Okay, so this is where the trials started getting worse. So the following week, as promised, Sean did bring LMA to Wales. She stayed 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, LMA decided that she was going to go back to London. So she got a coach without me knowing, and she ran away back to London. She had a boyfriend in London. All of her friends were in London. She went to London. Now, when she got to London, she did message me to let me know she's in London. And she said, Mum, I just wanted to stay the weekend and I'll be back on Monday. Okay. Monday came and she didn't get the coach. My dad went to pick her up from where she was and she wasn't there. I received a message later on that day from LMA saying that she's really sorry, but she doesn't think, well, not even she doesn't think, she said she's not coming home and that she's going to be staying in London. So obviously, you know, I was devastated. I knew where she was, but she was not listening and she wasn't coming home. After, you know, I had to call the police. The police arranged to go and pick her up because at the time she was still only 15. And I contacted the mother of her boyfriend to say the police are coming to pick her up, but not to let LMA know. Unfortunately, the police let me down. They got to the house and basically said to LMA, do you want to stay in London? She said yes. They asked the mother of her boyfriend, are you happy to look after her? She said yes. And they left my daughter in London. And I was left in Wales in absolute despair, not knowing what to do. I felt as if my whole world had crashed. This was my 15-year-old child, and she was in London on her own, you know, without her mother. I couldn't pray. I was constantly in tears. My sister, that didn't agree with me moving to Wales in the first place, had offered to give me money to move back to London. She said she'd transfer me a couple of £1,000 to get a rented property immediately. And I actually started looking. I did start looking. I was really looking because in my eyes, there was nothing else I could do but go back to London. And I just kept on looking, but something was niggling away in me. And it was the Lord trying to remind me what I had read, all the promises. But I just couldn't see through the dark clouds at the time. And what happened was a friend of mine, I was questioning, you know, whether God led me to Wales or whether I was deceived by Satan. You know, how could I leave my daughter in London? And then what happened is, oh, you can go on to the next slide. A good Christian friend of mine, Laverne, her name is, she rang me one evening. You know, LMA had been back in London now a good few days. And she rang me and she prayed with me. And all of a sudden, I felt like a dark cloud was lifting. I can't remember exactly what it was she said to me, but the prayer was what I needed. And she prayed with me. And all of a sudden, I just felt like I could see again. And I remember coming off the phone and calling Rhea to worship because I hadn't worshipped with her that morning, the evening before. And I called her to worship and we started singing and we were praising God. And it was like, as I said, it was like I could see again. And God brought my mind back to a quote I'd read in Thoughts About Blessed. And it says this: when tribulation comes upon us, how many of us are like Jacob? We think it the hand of an enemy, and in the darkness we wrestle blindly until our strength is spent, and we find no comfort or deliverance. To Jacob, the divine touch at break of day revealed the one with whom he had been contending, the angel of the covenant, and weeping and helpless, he fell upon the breast of the infinite love to receive the blessings for which his soul longed. So God reminded me that he had been leading me and not the enemy. I love this book and I used to read it a lot. And then he brought my mind to a quote in Patriarchs and Prophets. And if you go on to the next slide, the quote reads, some of his children clung to Sodom. So some of his children, Lot's children, clung to Sodom, and his wife refused to depart without them. The thought of leaving those whom he held dearest on earth seemed more than he could bear. The heavenly messengers took him and his wife and daughters by the hand and led them out of the city. At this point, I could truly relate to Lot in regards to leaving children behind and how his heart ached. I read this before, but I was feeling it now because this was now happening to me. My daughter was left behind, and I was deeply feeling it. My heart was breaking, and I held on to the fact that that God actually took me and my children by the hand and led us all out of London. I didn't leave my daughter behind. My daughter had chosen herself to go back. And this was giving me much strength at the time because I knew Lot had experienced had the same experience that I was having, but God was still leading. And if you go to the next slide, please. Galatians 9:62 is a scripture that I read also. And it says, Jesus said unto him, no man having put his hand to the plough and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. So, these weren't just coming to me by myself. As I said, I was with a group. There was quite a lot of us that had moved, and I was getting strength through the scriptures from my friends, different scriptures we would read together, which was bringing my mind back to where it should be, and helping me to realize that I hadn't made a mistake in moving, and that going back is not what God wants me to do, as it says here, having put his hand to the plough and looking back. That wouldn't make me fit for the kingdom. So this scripture obviously says that. So moving on to the next slide, please. So in this now, it was about me coming on my knees to God. Once I realized that I wouldn't be going back to London and that my daughter is in London, even though I knew where she was, I had much contact with the mother of her boyfriend. She did go on to stay with my brother in the end, but at that point she was there and made sure she was safe. And I just went on my knees and I prayed to God and I said, I'm leaving Ella May in your hands. Promise me you'll look after her. And that was my prayer. And God has promised, and he's been faithful to me. And I felt such peace. I knew I'd done God's will. Ella May wasn't quite ready for that move, but God still wanted me there. God still wanted me to move to the countryside. He wanted Rhea to move to the countryside. And he knew that my Christian character, our characters would grow, and that Ella May will one day follow, God willing. Now, he's kept his promise to me, as I said. She's now 27 years old. She's grown into a beautiful lady. Actually, pretty quickly, as we moved, she was in a right mess. She didn't know whether she was coming and going. And all of a sudden, within about a year of me moving, she took herself off to do an apprenticeship in hairdressing. From that, she got a really good job in a salon in Mayfair. That took her on. From that, she moved to Dubai. And, I'm not just talking about materialistic things. I'm talking about, she just grew. Her whole outlook on life changed. But most of all, her personality, she became very, very humble. She became very grateful. She would come and visit me in Wales and she would say things like, Mum, I'm glad you didn't move back to London. I'm glad you didn't move back to London. You're a changed person. You're much better. You are such a different person since moving to the countryside. I'm glad you didn't move back. And if you go on to the next slide, just a little photograph of her there working. And to this day, she's doing really well. She hasn't given her life to God as yet, but she's very spiritual. She knows that all of her help has come from God. And anytime I'm about to worry about her, anytime I'm about to think, what's going on with her, I start to worry. God always reminds me of that promise that he gave me, that he would look after her, and he has. I don't have time to go into how he has looked after, but just he has in every single way. So moving on to the next slide. So after we'd moved to the first house in Clanderbeer, within a year, the landlord had decided that he wanted to sell the house. So we moved about 5 miles away to this lovely little bungalow in Betus. 2 years on, this landlord decided he wanted to sell his house. which was fine because by this time I had started to understand Wales, started to know my way around, started to slow my pace of life down, and was now ready to move to the countryside. We had a friend that was a fellow Adventist that had moved from the city to the country, who would now become an estate agent. And I'd let him know that I was looking for a house in the countryside. And I found a house. Well, I didn't find this house found me. So if you go on to the next slide, this house was many miles away from where I was initially living in Candabia in Carmarthenshire. This house was now in Powys, good 40 miles away. When we went to look at the house, myself and Rhea, we fell in love with the house straight away. Yeah, and I moved in. Sorry, and we moved in within a month. We were living in this house. It was lovely living there. We had it was on about 40 acres. The landlord of the house would work the land, so he had sheep. So he was there on the land every day. So we had company, we had the sheep. They were so helpful. They couldn't do enough for us. You know, any wood we needed for the fire, they chopped down trees and gave us wood. And yeah, we started to really enjoy life. You know, I started to feel very, very settled. And Ray was feeling settled. And by now I'd started homeschooling as well. By this time, she's about 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. This is a picture of Ray at that time. Yeah, she was at 7. And that's the river that ran through the land we were living on. Oh, sorry, next slide. Next one. Yeah, that's a picture of Rhea. Okay, so that's the river that ran through the land. So we could walk the land. We could do anything we wanted there. Many of our friends would come. We would camp out at times, and yeah, we were having a great time. And if you go on to the next slide, you just see Rhea running around there chasing the sheep out of the yard. And the next slide is a little lamb that she found and brought home. She used to bring lambs home all the time. And if you remember, Ellen White has a quote about little lambs. She says in Child Guidance, actually, page 48, verse 3, she says, the little children should come especially close to nature. Instead of putting fashion's shackles upon them, let them be free like the lambs to play in the sweet, fresh sunlight. And that's from Child Guidance. And the next slide just shows a picture of her homeschooling. It was a sunny day, so we took the desk outside and we did her schoolwork outside. But obviously, whilst living in the countryside, I'm a single mother, not working. So, you know, we had to think of ways of bringing in the bread to sustain the family, you know, to pay the rent and to pay the bills. So my friend and I, Alice Thomas, we started a little business and we started to make shea butter. So we got the recipes for shea butters and we would make them smell nice, and we made shea butters and we made soaps. And this name is copyrighted, by the way, so don't anyone think of stealing it. We called it In His Hands. Okay. We haven't done any for a little while, but we're going to start again, don't worry. So yeah, so we started selling creams and soaps, and we would be given, well, family camp was one place we would sell our goods. We would sell them to brethren, people at church, friends, and family, but mainly, you know, at camp meeting as well. And as well as making cosmetics, I would make granola bars, and granola. And also I would grow wheatgrass. So I used to grow wheatgrass and then put it in little bags, freeze it, and sell them by the pound to people. Okay, so as well as that, I was part of a ministry, still am part of a ministry called Malachi 4:2, along with the Hanson Bartholomew family. And yeah, we would have health guests come and stay at our homes. So we would have people come from the cities with different ailments, and we would detox them and go through a program with them, as long as up to 6 weeks. So if you go on to the next slide. So that's a picture of me there making granola. Yeah, that's my granola bars, delicious. And yeah, so, you know, this, as you can see on the bed here, is a medical missionary manual and just a welcome gift for our health guests that would come to stay. I had a large enough house, so we would have health guests come to stay on quite a regular basis, actually. And that picture is a picture of ABC juice, which is apple, beetroot, and carrot with a little bit of ginger. We would often detox guests on their arrival. That's usually the first stage. And moving on to the next slide. We also had an allotment, which was owned by all of the families, the 5 families collectively. We would all go there throughout the summer, you know, sow seeds. And yeah, we would reap a harvest, a big, bountiful harvest, you know, fruits and vegetables, you know, to sweet corn, aubergine, courgette, whatever. But it was a lovely time for us to get together. So these are things that we would do whilst living in the country. Now, moving to Wales was the best decision that I've ever made. It has come with many challenges, though, but equally many blessings. Maybe next time I can talk about more of the ups and downs. But the main thing I wanted to get across in this presentation is that as a single mum, it's definitely doable. Lay strong foundations, move with like-minded people. And as I said early on, if you can't move with like-minded people, move to somewhere where you know there are like-minded people, where there's a church, where there's going to be children, other children that are homeschooling, where they can, you know, where you can have company. Now, you will need people, like it or not. You will need people, you know, whether that's to help you move house, whether that's to help you with some things in your home, whether that's to help you with your car when it's having problems, to get you to church. You'll need other people. So that, you know, that's really, really important. Right, so I'm actually almost at the end now, so just bear with me, just a couple of more minutes. Okay, so as I was saying, it would be a lonely venture on your own. Now, being single means you need to think of ways to make money to sustain your family. Now, this was the toughest thing for me. The money coming in just wasn't enough to pay the rent and bills. I tried many things. I even tried working from home, getting jobs to work from home, and actually found one job working from home, and it was so awful and so technical that I couldn't do it. Actually, they let me go. I lasted 4 weeks. So in 2017, I made the hard decision to move away from our country home. We decided to move from that home. We'd been there just over 4 years at that time, about 4.5 years. And we moved back into a quiet village called Clandilo. I've since moved from there, now live on the outskirts of Swansea, by the beach. But, you know, it was a very hard decision. But even in that, even though I do still have regrets, I wonder if I should have held on more by faith, and probably I should have, but there's no mistakes. You know, this journey, moving to Wales, is more, it's not a destination. Moving to the countryside is not a destination, it's a journey. You know, you're going to learn many things on this journey, and you may sometimes go 2 steps backwards to go forward again. You know, so in my eyes, there's no mistakes. Moving closer to the town what enabled me actually to go and study, and which is something I always wanted to do. I was able to get a job, a part-time job, which made, you know, I was able then to pay my bills and the rent, and I was able to study, and I went to study as a counsellor and got a degree in counselling. And today I am a qualified counsellor. I've got much work, and because of COVID, I now do a lot of my counselling via Zoom or via the telephone, where before COVID it was mainly, you know, it was face to face. So, and I'm working with a lot of people that have addictions. You know, they suffer with substance misuse. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. And since then, I've also become a wife. My husband just gave me a note to stop saying, sorry, I'm nervous. I'm married now, and I've been blessed with a husband. And I would really like to, in the next year or two, move back into a more rural location. I would say that I'm more prepared for that now. I would say that I have a regular income coming in with my counselling work. I mean, there's so much counselling work out there. There's so many people that need a safe space to be able to talk about their issues. So yeah, I'm hoping that we will move back very soon. And there's so many lessons. So if you go to the next slide. So this is just a few pictures. That's my daughter Rhea on the left and Elame on the right at my graduation in May, and a couple of photographs of my wedding. And as I said, there's so many lessons that you learn along the way. I mean, I'm 12 years into this journey now and still learning. This has been my experience. Everyone has their own experience. But the 4 chapters that I mentioned at the beginning, the foundation, finding a suitable home, trials and faith, and joy and peace, are what all our journeys have in common. Everyone I speak to about country living has these 4 chapters. I don't know one person that has moved to the countryside without having a really, really a trial of fire. I really don't. But in those trials, your faith is strengthened, as you know. And my faith certainly was strengthened in my trial. And there's been more. There's been trials, ups and downs throughout the whole journey. But there's also been much joy and peace. Right, I had a lot more to share, but the time hasn't allowed me. I've actually gone over. But please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Again, I do apologise. You can go on to the next slide. I do apologise for the delay, and thank you for waiting 30 minutes for me. I do apologise for saying a lot. It's very nerve-wracking talking into a screen and not being able to get a response from people. But I do hope you have enjoyed the presentation. If you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you.
That, ladies and gentlemen, has been our substitute broadcast for today. I trust you enjoyed it, and we're hoping to see you in the next 2 weeks. Take care. Stay blessed.